talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
Hi besties, I am Guruyata Bashan Lashari with COREVANTA. Today we should discuss
Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were once considered one of Hollywood's rare fairy tales, the picture-perfect couple who managed to survive the unrelenting glare of fame, the crushing pressure of the industry, and the relentless challenges of addiction, career demands, and personal sacrifice. And for nearly 2 decades the world believed their marriage was unshakable, built on love, second chances, and the kind of loyalty that seemed almost extinct in celebrity culture. But beneath the glossy red carpet appearances, the hand-holding moments, and the glowing interviews, there was always a quiet storm brewing. A fragile porcelain vase that dazzled from the outside yet harbored hidden fractures within. And when those cracks finally deepened beyond repair, the inevitable collapse shocked fans across the globe. Because how could a bond that survived rehab, gossip, and relentless scrutiny suddenly unravel after so long? And why now, when it seemed the couple had weathered every storm? To understand the depth of this bombshell divorce, one has to go back to the very foundation of their love story. When Keith, a rising country star, was drowning in the shadows of addiction, battling demons that threatened not only his career but his very life. And it was Nicole, the acclaimed actress, already an icon with a career spanning decades, who chose love over fear, standing beside him when many others would have walked away, guiding him through interventions, urging him to confront his struggles, and ultimately becoming both his partner and his lifeline, the steady force that helped him survive his darkest moments. And for years this narrative was celebrated publicly, with Keith often praising Nicole as the reason he was still alive, still thriving, and still able to perform, with interviews, acceptance speeches, and documentaries framing her as the unshakable anchor that kept him grounded. Yet that very dynamic, that imbalance of power between savior and the one saved, may have shifted the entire foundation of their marriage, planting seeds of resentment and exhaustion that could only remain buried for so long before surfacing in destructive ways. For nearly 20 years, fans saw the image of perfection, the couple that smiled at premieres, embraced at award shows, and paraded their affection as proof that love could conquer all. But insiders whisper that behind closed doors Nicole often carried more than her share of the weight, taking on the dual role of wife and caretaker, a balance that blurred the line between romantic partner and maternal figure. And as much as Keith seemed to thrive under her guidance, leaning on her stability, and as much as his team played into that narrative of redemption through her love, the reality for Nicole may have been far more suffocating. For how long can someone play both lover and mother, both partner and protector, without losing themselves in the process? According to sources close to Nicole, the fractures had been there for years, the subtle distance in intimacy, the mechanical routine of their relationship, the sense of going through the motions rather than truly thriving as equals. And though the outside world admired their endurance, Nicole may have quietly grown weary of carrying a weight that never seemed to lessen. Realizing that what the world applauded as strength was in fact a cage she could no longer live inside. And this exhaustion eventually became impossible to ignore. With the whispers of imbalance growing louder, the private discontent spilling over into public decisions, and eventually the choice to walk away from a marriage that seemed perfect on paper, but fragile at its core. Still, the unraveling of their bond wasn't just about emotional imbalance. It was about something darker, something more scandalous, something that took the already fragile foundation and shattered it with one devastating blow. And according to insiders, it wasn't merely distance, schedules, or fading passion that drove Nicole to finally file for divorce. It was betrayal, the suspicion of another woman, and the undeniable signs that Keith had not only checked out of the marriage emotionally but had redirected his passion elsewhere, leaving Nicole not as the cherished wife who had saved him countless times, but as the second choice in her own home. And for someone of her stature, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment for nearly 2 decades, that was the ultimate breaking point. The rumors began quietly, whispers in Nashville's tight-knit music scene, subtle hints that something was off long before the headlines exploded. And though Keith had been on tour, performing to sold-out crowds and presenting the image of a man still in love with his wife, insiders began to notice subtle changes. From the way he carried himself on stage to the way he seemed unusually energized when performing with his newly revamped band, and the most telling sign came when he made a shocking alteration to the very song that symbolized his romance with Nicole, the fighter. A track originally inspired by her unwavering devotion during his darkest days, a song that had always been performed as an ode to their love. Yet during a recent performance, Keith shockingly swapped out the lyric referencing Nicole, and instead made a pointed nod to his new guitarist, Maggie Baugh, an up-and-coming musician who had recently joined his restructured band after he suddenly fired several longtime members, including those who had been with him for over 2 decades, a shakeup that raised eyebrows across the industry. And when the lyric change occurred on stage, the audience immediately picked up on it, sparking a firestorm of speculation that spread like wildfire online, with fans and critics alike asking why Keith would so brazenly shift a declaration of love from his wife to a bandmate, especially so close to the time when divorce rumors began swirling. Was this simply a playful stage moment,
I don't think I relate
as
to
his
any of
team
my
tried to
characters.
dismiss,
or
was it a deliberate public signal of where his heart truly lay? For Nicole, according to sources, it was no longer a question. It was an answer, an undeniable confirmation of suspicions she had already harbored, a humiliating reminder that the intimacy missing at home seemed to have found a stage elsewhere. And while the world debated whether it was innocent or scandalous, Nicole had already made her decision, refusing to live as a secondary figure in her own marriage. But this wasn't just about one performance, one lyric, or one woman. It was about years of sacrifice, years of carrying the emotional weight of a marriage where she had given more than she had received, years of playing the savior only to realize that in the end, she could not save a man who no longer wanted to be saved. And for Nicole, the realization that loyalty and intimacy had both evaporated was enough to trigger the choice she had been resisting for so long. Keith's friends, according to reports, had long suspected the marriage was unraveling, describing it less as a sudden break and more as a slow drift, a gradual separation that felt inevitable. And yet for fans, the announcement hit like a thunderclap, shaking the image of Hollywood's rare forever couple, and raising questions about what really goes on behind the curtain of carefully crafted celebrity love stories. For years, people pointed to Nicole and Keith as proof that marriages could survive addiction, fame, and relentless scrutiny, but now the cracks revealed a truth far more uncomfortable. That sometimes, even the strongest-looking bonds are built on fragile foundations, and that even love that appears unshakable can fracture under the weight of imbalance, betrayal, and exhaustion. And so, as the rumors swirl, the insider whispers grow louder, and the footage of Keith's shocking lyric change continues to circulate online, the world is left to wonder not only what went wrong but whether Nicole, after years of holding their marriage together, finally recognized that her love, her devotion, and her sacrifice were no longer enough, that the vase had shattered beyond repair, and that the time had come to walk away from the man she once saved in order to save herself. But this wasn't just about one performance, one lyric, or one woman. It was about years of sacrifice, years of carrying the emotional weight of a marriage where she had given more than she had received, years of playing the savior only to realize that in the end, she could not save a man who no longer wanted to be saved. And for Nicole, the realization that loyalty and intimacy had both evaporated was enough to trigger the choice she had been resisting for so long. Keith's friends, according to reports, had long suspected the marriage was unraveling, describing it less as a sudden break and more as a slow drift, a gradual separation that felt inevitable. And yet for fans, the announcement hit like a thunderclap, shaking the image of Hollywood's rare forever couple, and raising questions about what really goes on behind the curtain of carefully crafted celebrity love stories. For years, people pointed to Nicole and Keith as proof that marriages could survive addiction, fame, and relentless scrutiny. But now the cracks revealed a truth far more uncomfortable. That sometimes, even the strongest-looking bonds are built on fragile foundations, and that even love that appears unshakable can fracture under the weight of imbalance, betrayal, and exhaustion. And so, as the rumors swirl, the insider whispers grow louder, and the footage of Keith's shocking lyric change continues to circulate online, the world is left to wonder not only what went wrong but whether Nicole, after years of holding their marriage together, finally recognized that her love, her devotion, and her sacrifice were no longer enough, that the vase had shattered beyond repair, and that the time had come to walk away from the man she once saved in order to save herself. Of emotional drifting, noticing subtle but telling signs, the late-night rehearsals that went unexplained, the sudden bursts of energy that seemed to appear only around his bandmates, the way his focus shifted away from their family routines and toward this newly rebuilt musical world that strangely revolved around one young guitarist. And though many around Keith dismissed these as harmless, for Nicole the pattern painted a clear picture, because she had been through too much, seen too many red flags, and carried too heavy a burden to ignore what was now staring her directly in the face. And if in the early days she could explain away his struggles as addiction or career stress, this time the betrayal felt different, more personal, because it wasn't about his demons, it was about his choices. Industry insiders in Nashville began to buzz louder, with one music executive telling the Daily Mail that everyone is talking about it. The alleged connection between Keith and the younger woman who had joined his band, and though no names were publicly confirmed, Maggie's presence became the center of speculation, with fans dissecting footage, photos, and lyrics, drawing connections between his stage behavior and the timing of Nicole's abrupt decision to file for divorce. And while Keith's team rushed to dismiss the rumors as nothing more than wild speculation, Nicole herself wasn't convinced, because when you have lived in someone's shadow for nearly 2 decades, carried their weight, fought for their sobriety, and stood by them in their darkest hours, you develop an instinct for truth, and her instincts told her that loyalty was gone, replaced by something new, something that had no place in a marriage she had already sacrificed so much to preserve. The heartbreak for Nicole wasn't just about Keith's alleged distraction. It was about realizing that the years she had spent saving him had left her drained, and that in the end, he hadn't saved their marriage in return. A friend of Nicole told People magazine that this wasn't about a simple drift apart, that this wasn't just a couple who lost connection over time, but rather a long-coming unraveling where the imbalance had grown too heavy for one person to carry. And when faced with the final insult of suspected betrayal, Nicole finally pulled the trigger, walking away from the man she had once believed would stand beside her until the end. What makes this scandal all the more shocking is the way Keith himself seemed to unravel professionally just as his marriage crumbled, because firing a band that had been loyal for decades raised red flags even before divorce rumors surfaced, and when he replaced them with new faces, the whispers only grew louder, with many questioning whether this inner voice guiding his decisions was truly artistic, or whether it was personal entanglement dressed up as creative evolution. And the lyric change at his concert only confirmed what fans had begun to suspect, because you don't take a song like The Fighter, a song universally known as an ode to Nicole, a ballad of resilience inspired by her unwavering devotion, and suddenly swap the lyric to reference another woman on stage unless you're trying to send a message. And whether intentional or subconscious, Keith's gesture became the spark that ignited the wildfire, a moment that Nicole could never unsee and one that millions witnessed as well, exposing to the world the very cracks she had been privately grappling with. For her, this wasn't about rumors anymore, it was about respect, and the public nature of his shift from wife to bandmate was enough to strip away any illusion that their marriage could be saved. And so, quietly but decisively, she separated from him, leaving behind a life she had built for nearly 2 decades and choosing dignity over denial. But perhaps the most tragic irony of it all is that Nicole and Keith's love story was supposed to be one of Hollywood's rare triumphs, the couple that proved endurance was possible, that addiction could be conquered, that fame didn't have to destroy intimacy, and that love could survive even under the harshest spotlights. And for years they played that role perfectly, parading their affection, speaking openly about their bond, holding hands at premieres as if to prove to the world that they were unbreakable. But behind the scenes, the imbalance of power and sacrifice had always been tilting toward one side, with Nicole playing savior far more often than partner, and eventually realizing that the love she had chosen again and again was not the love she was receiving in return. And when that realization collided with the betrayal of another woman, it became impossible to continue the charade. Insiders close to the couple insist that Nicole did not walk away lightly, that she fought for them, suggested counseling, and even hoped in the beginning that separation might serve as a wake-up call. But Keith, according to reports, had already checked out, emotionally tethered elsewhere. And once she saw that truth, she refused to play second to anyone, choosing instead to reclaim her life, her dignity, and her freedom, even if it meant dismantling the image of Hollywood's golden couple. In the end, the story of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's divorce isn't just about addiction, exhaustion, or even betrayal. It's about the hidden costs of carrying someone else's demons for too long, about the quiet sacrifices that erode intimacy over time, and about the moment when even the strongest, most patient partner finally says enough. And as the footage of Keith's lyric change continues to circulate, as fans debate the truth of his connection to Maggie, and as Hollywood scrambles to reconcile the image of a perfect marriage with the reality of its collapse, one thing has become painful clear. The love story that once inspired millions was, in Nicole's eyes, already broken, and the porcelain vase that dazzled the world had been cracked for years, waiting only for one final, undeniable fracture to shatter completely. The question now isn't whether Nicole and Keith can repair their marriage. It's whether the public will ever know the full truth of what happened behind the spotlight, whether the whispers of a younger woman, the firing of a loyal band, and the humiliating lyric swap were the real reasons or simply the final straws in a marriage that had been unraveling all along. And while Keith Urban may continue to sing on stage, and Nicole Kidman will undoubtedly continue to dazzle on screen, the love story they once told the world is over, replaced by a scandal that proves once again that in Hollywood, even the most perfect fairy tales can hide the darkest truths. The unraveling of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's marriage was never going to be a quiet story. Not when the cracks began to show under the harshest spotlight of all. A concert stage where millions of eyes and countless cameras were already trained on them. What started as whispers among fans watching clips online quickly spiraled into an open question that shook Hollywood and country music alike. Was this the moment their storybook love fell apart? The idea that a concert performance could plant the seed of doubt in a marriage nearly 2 decades strong might sound sensational. But when one watches closely, the clues take on an uncomfortable clarity. For Nicole, those flashing stage lights didn't just reveal the music, they exposed something much darker. A performance within a performance, where the man she thought she knew might have been playing a role all along. To the outside world, Nicole and Keith had always appeared inseparable, a red carpet vision of devotion. A power couple who had defied the odds of celebrity romance. She was the Oscar-winning actress whose career shimmered across decades. He was the rugged country superstar whose voice had etched itself into the hearts of millions. And together they embodied a kind of perfection that critics and fans alike adored. But perfection, especially in Hollywood, is often a carefully staged act, and what Nicole reportedly uncovered went beyond whispers of infidelity. It was a revelation that suggested the entire love story might have been a script Keith performed for the cameras and for her, while hiding truths of his own. Sources close to Nicole describe her early suspicions not as fiery outbursts of jealousy, but as quiet moments of reflection when the veneer began to crack. At first, the signs were subtle. A gesture that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous, a public declaration of love that seemed better suited to headlines than to private intimacy. To most, these would be dismissed as the ordinary quirks of life under the public eye. But Nicole, seasoned by decades of navigating fame, knew when something wasn't right. She had seen too many carefully polished facades in her career to ignore the feeling that her own marriage might be another. The pivotal moment, insiders say, came not from gossip columns or private confrontations, but from the stage itself. Keith, ever the charismatic showman, let his passion spill into a performance where his words and gestures appeared to cross lines that no devoted husband should cross. The name Maggie Bowe, whispered more loudly in fan circles after a song dedication that blurred the line between romantic tribute and professional collaboration, became the centerpiece of Nicole's unraveling faith. What stung most wasn't simply the possibility of Keith's devotion shifting to someone else, but the chilling thought that so much of what she had believed in, the glances, the love songs, the red carpet smiles, might never have been entirely authentic. It was not the idea of one woman that cut deepest. It was the possibility of years of deception, of a love story performed as dutifully as Keith strummed his guitar. Imagine rereading letters you once cherished, only to find in hindsight that the handwriting seemed too deliberate, the words too crafted to be real. That was Nicole's new lens on her life, a piercing realization that turned once precious memories into haunting reminders of artifice. Those close to Nicole reveal that she didn't react with fury or public confrontation. Her strength lay in silence, in that cold, piercing kind of heartbreak that doesn't shout but suffocates quietly. To some, that was the most shocking part. Nicole Kidman, one of the most expressive actresses of her generation, reduced not to dramatic theatrics but to a chilling stillness, a quiet reckoning that spoke louder than any outburst could. Divorce for her wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about truth, about no longer playing along in a story she no longer believed. What she uncovered behind the curtain changed everything, and it left her unwilling to uphold the image of a perfect couple when the foundation had already turned to dust. Keith, on the other hand, was reportedly blindsided. While Nicole confided in trusted friends, piecing together fragments of evidence and private admissions that painted a damning picture, Keith appeared to believe the facade still held strong. He continued to perform, continued to tell stories on stage, continued to introduce songs with lines that fans interpreted as declarations of love for Nicole, even as her faith in those words evaporated. In one concert, Keith's playful reference to Maggie, spoken with the casual intimacy of a man caught in the rush of music, struck Nicole like a blade. There he was, telling the world he'd be Maggie's guitar player, while Nicole, his wife of nearly 2 decades, sat at home with their children, unaware that her name in his music had been quietly replaced. To the public, it may have seemed like harmless banter. To Nicole, it was confirmation. He was taking the very song that had once belonged to them, a piece of their shared love, and giving it to another. It wasn't the first time Keith's demons had strained their marriage. His well-documented battles with addiction, his rehab stints, his relapses, Nicole had stood by him through it all, shielding him from the harshest blows of gossip, and offering him stability when the industry threatened to consume him. But those were struggles they fought together, demons she could see and understand. What she faced now was different. This wasn't about substances or temptation. It was about manipulation, about discovering that the man she had defended for so long might have been performing devotion rather than living it. This was darker than relapse, more painful than scandal. It was betrayal entwined with illusion. The contrast between Keith's stage persona and Nicole's private revelations created a devastating duality. Fans swooned over his romantic gestures, his heartfelt dedications, his smiling appearances with Nicole at glittering events. Yet every one of those moments, through Nicole's new perspective, began to feel rehearsed. The chemistry that had seemed electric was suddenly suspect, the passion possibly more performance than partnership. Friends say she began to see their life together not as a spontaneous love story, but as a carefully managed production, designed to present the perfect image to fans and the press while concealing inconvenient truths. To a woman whose entire career revolved around performance, the idea that her marriage had been one as well was intolerable. The breaking point came not in a dramatic confrontation but in private discoveries. Texts she wasn't meant to see, conversations leaked from Keith's inner circle, digital footprints that told stories more honest than his smile ever had. Each revelation chipped away at her trust until there was nothing left to protect. Nicole wasn't angry, insiders insist. She was hollowed out. The pain wasn't the presence of another woman, but the absence of sincerity. For her, the betrayal was not physical but Nicole's path, by contrast, was one of calm resolve. While Keith scrambled to control the narrative, her silence spoke volumes. She didn't rant or rage, didn't issue public statements designed to shame him. Instead, she withdrew, calculated, and final. In her stillness, Keith found no foothold. Every attempt to reframe the story was undermined by the simple truth that she had already walked away. For gossip outlets, the contrast was irresistible. One spouse spiraling under the spotlight, the other composed and perhaps even liberated. The image of Nicole Kidman, poised and controlled, standing opposite a reeling Keith Urban, became a symbol of the scandal. Not just a marriage ending, but a storybook collapsing into rubble. And so part one of their unraveling closes not with answers, but with questions that haunt both their fans and themselves. Was Nicole's heartbreak truly about betrayal, or was it about discovering that her entire marriage had been a carefully managed act? Did Keith ever fully understand the weight of what he had lost, or was he too caught up in the performance to see reality until it was too late? As Nicole's silence grew louder and Keith's performances grew heavier, one truth became clear. Their love story, once believed unshakable, was built less on devotion than on illusion. And when that illusion shattered, so did everything else. When Nicole Kidman finally made the decision to walk away, it wasn't marked by the fireworks that tabloids often crave. There was no shouting match caught by paparazzi lenses, no dramatic confrontation on a public stage. Instead, there was silence, the kind of silence that only comes when every word has already been said, if not out loud then in the heart. Those who know Nicole best say that silence was her final act of strength. She had supported Keith through addiction and relapse, endured the endless rumors of wandering eyes and temptation, and tolerated the relentless scrutiny of living in a marriage that the world felt entitled to dissect. But when she uncovered what she believed to be not merely betrayal, but deception woven into the very fabric of their marriage, her resolve hardened. Divorce wasn't a question anymore, it was inevitability. Keith, by contrast, reacted as if he had been hit by a storm he never saw coming. On stage, he kept up the energy, pouring himself into each performance as though sheer intensity could drown out the whispers. Fans continued to cheer, tickets continued to sell, and his team worked overtime to polish the narrative. Official statements dismissed rumors of infidelity, insisting Keith's focus was solely on his music and family. Yet the more they pushed this line, the more fans scoured his every move for signs of a man crumbling under pressure. His tearful renditions of songs that had once been associated with Nicole only deepened suspicion. Was he singing to her still? Or was every lyric a plea for forgiveness that would never come? The irony wasn't lost on observers. Keith Urban, a man who had built a career on raw, confessional music, now stood accused of staging emotion rather than living it. And the more Nicole withdrew into dignified silence, the more Keith's visible anguish fed the narrative of guilt. It is one thing to be accused of betrayal. It is another to look like a man whose world has fallen apart because the accusations are true. Behind the scenes, his choices became erratic. Longtime bandmates who had been by his side for years were suddenly replaced, dismissed in what insiders called a creative shakeup, but what others saw as a desperate attempt to reinvent himself. He surrounded himself with new faces, new sounds, a new image. But reinvention, while powerful on stage, did little to patch the wound at home. Those close to Keith say that every backstage moment was haunted by the emptiness of returning to a house no longer warmed by Nicole's presence. It was one thing to face critics. It was another to face an empty bed. Nicole, meanwhile, displayed a poise that only fueled the fascination. To outsiders, it almost appeared as though she had prepared for this moment for years. Her decision was not impulsive but measured, the product of long reflection and private discoveries that had left her convinced there was no path forward. Friends described her as calm, clear-eyed, and heartbreakingly firm. She wasn't running from pain but stepping out of an illusion she refused to live in any longer. To many, that calm was the sharpest contrast of all. While Keith stumbled and flailed, Nicole glided with quiet dignity. The woman once celebrated as an actress of extraordinary range was now living her most understated performance, a refusal to perform at all. The media storm, of course, was relentless. Gossip sites speculated about Maggie Bowe, replaying the concert footage endlessly, dissecting his every word and gesture. Was his dedication to her on-stage innocent camaraderie, or a veiled confession? Did the chemistry fans thought they saw between them point to a deeper truth? For Nicole, the specifics may not have mattered. Whether or not Keith crossed physical lines, the emotional betrayal of replacing their private love story with a public performance directed at someone else was unforgivable. The betrayal wasn't measured in acts but in intentions, in the discovery that her. Unable to comprehend how nearly 18 years of marriage had unraveled so swiftly. What he didn't understand, those close to Nicole insist, is that the decision wasn't swift at all. It was the product of years of chipped trust, years of doubts quietly dismissed until the evidence became impossible to ignore. The story of their divorce became more than just a Hollywood split. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the strongest-looking marriages can be fragile when built on performance rather than authenticity. To fans, it was the collapse of a fairy tale. A brutal reminder that the images projected on red carpets and stages are just that, images. For Nicole, it was liberation. For Keith, it was ruin. And yet, even as the dust settled, questions lingered. Did Keith truly love Nicole, but lose himself in the illusion of performance? Or had the entire relationship been, as Nicole feared, a carefully managed act designed to maintain an image? Was Maggie merely a symbol of his wandering devotion? Or the final crack in a marriage already fractured by years of quiet deception? The answers remain elusive, but the impact is undeniable. Their love story, once held up as an example of endurance in Hollywood, ended not with a bang but with a slow unmasking, a realization that the fairy tale had always been more fragile than it appeared. Now, as Keith continues to stand beneath the stage lights, the applause of thousands cannot drown out the silence that follows him home. His music, once inspired by the woman who stood by his side, now carries the weight of loss. Every lyric, every chord, is colored by the shadow of what he has lost. Nicole, on the other hand, has stepped away from the performance. Her life, her choices, now belong to her alone. No longer tethered to an illusion, she walks forward with dignity, leaving behind a story that captivated millions, but ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own falsehoods. Thanks for watching. Subscribe my channel COREVANTA for more updates, with Sardar Zuriat Abbas Khan Lashari.